Hello and welcome back. In the previous video of this series, I announced that I was going to be making a mini documentary project. I've now finished the production of that and it's currently in the editing phases. And I also mentioned that I was going to be entering it into a competition. The competition's now 1 week away, so it's getting quite tight for time. But I thought I'd stop to make this video for you to talk about the pre-production. Now, this series of videos is going to be talking through each of the steps, the pre-production, the production, the editing, and then I might do an additional video talking about what happened with the competition. I'm just entering that for a bit of fun to see what happens and as an added extra challenge. So in this video, as I mentioned, I wanted to focus on the pre-production. Now, I'm sure many of you are aware that pre-production is really essential. It can help save a lot of time when you actually get to the shooting. It can also help you to iron out any creases, potential problems ahead of time. And when you're working on a documentary, obviously everything's still going to be a bit left up to chance, and there's a lot of stuff you can't control or you might not necessarily even want to control. But trying to think about lots of different aspects beforehand and planning those out to at least make sure you get the core elements that you need for your story and to understand how you might light certain scenes or what times of day and these kind of things are really crucial during the pre-production stages. So I'll outline the process which I used for this video. I'm not saying this is perfect. I'm just showing the process I used, and I found it quite helpful. So hopefully someone else out there will also take something away from it that they can use on their own project. So in terms of organising my pre-production, I used the program Notion. Again, I'm sure quite a lot of you probably heard of this. I use this to organise all of my projects pretty much. I've also used other programs like Millernote, which are really good. But for this one, I used Notion just to keep everything in one place. So this was basically acting as my central hub for my pre-production. I realised before I dive into all of the pre-production, I should probably recap a little bit on what the main sort of story or themes of the mini documentary project were and the ideas for it. So the entire story is based around a friend of mine named Glenn. Now, Glenn's a bit of an older guy than me. He's had quite an interesting life and lots of different stories. And this documentary is particularly around one story, which involves a trip to Australia he made. So he's from Australia originally. And there was a mysterious wooden box which he found at a relative's house. And this story that I wanted to tell was just about what was in that box and how it reconnected to his past. And it was playing around with feelings of sort of nostalgia, how memories of the past can change how you feel about your life now, and how it can uncover different, I guess, ideas and themes about your life and how you focus on it being at a slightly older age now and reflecting on your childhood. So I hope that gives a little bit about the documentary. I'm trying not to give too much away because I want to leave some of that to a bit of a surprise when I actually release it. But hopefully it gives a bit to go on. Now, because it was about a story and about nostalgia, I wanted to have a sort of late afternoon feel. I wanted the idea of originally my idea was sort of Glenn sitting with a coffee talking about his life and talking about this box and what it uncovered about his childhood. So I knew I wanted to film some shots in the garden, and Glenn had a really nice studio in his garden. So there was lots of little elements I knew, and I had an idea of how I kind of wanted it to look. And I also wanted to play around with having a slightly filmic look to it. So a bit of playing around with a bit of nostalgia in terms of how I might bring it out in the grade and how I shoot it. But also I wanted the focus to be a blend of a formal interview along with some more organic scenes, just capturing him and just hanging out with Glenn and getting to know him a bit better as a person. Now, one of the first things I did in the pre-production, apart from kind of just plotting out a really basic, rough summary of what the kind of story I wanted to be and what it was going to focus on, was to go and collect some visual references. I think people do this in different orders, but for me, I like doing this quite early on because it gets me excited and it helps to make it more real. It helps take it from out of my head and into reality. In order to collect the references, I used the website Frameset. Now, Frameset's a really great resource for looking for stills. It has lots of stills from sort of smaller projects, commercials, TV adverts, these kind of things. And a lot of the projects are maybe a bit more attainable in terms of the look and feel than, for example, huge Hollywood films. Don't get me wrong, I think it's great to look at Hollywood films for references, and they serve a really good purpose as well. But sometimes when you're working on a small project, when it was just mainly me working on it, setting your expectations at some Hollywood level lighting and production can end up making it a bit difficult or a bit disheartening when you try to do it all yourself. Great to aim high, but I just found Frameset has a lot more stuff that's more close to what you might want to do for the project and managing your own expectations as well. So I scrolled for different images. I said I didn't want to give away too much, but it's a bit hard without showing some of the references I looked for. So some of the scenes were going to involve projectors and also old photographs and these kind of things. So I was collecting images around these that had the right feel. And then also I know I wanted some of the shots in the garden with this late afternoon feel. And I had this idea of quite sort of rich greens and nice sort of saturated filmic colours. And also because I wanted Glenn's interview to take place in the garden studio. I was looking for references that had the same kind of feel, just to get an idea of how I might want it to look lighting wise and also mood wise. And I really felt, because it's a bit of a nostalgic piece, having that late afternoon feel kind of tied it all together nicely. So here's a quick sort of preview of the mood board which I collected. I haven't got too many images. I think it was just enough. Some of these are sort of more direct references, and others are actually just more the kind of feeling or theme, or maybe just certain colours and things which I liked. Whereas some of them might be more direct references, like I know I want a shot just like that. But overall, it's just to capture the kind of feel of it, to make this nice mood board. Now, with a documentary, always some of it's going to be left up to, you know, surprises and things that just happen. But you also want to make sure you at least have a basic plot planned out. Now, in terms of the plot for this, I just wanted to have a kind of structure that I could fall back on to make sure at least I had the kind of basic story elements that we needed. So the main focus of this story, it's just a small intimate piece. It's about Glenn introducing himself. Then we have something that hooks you in a bit, which is this mysterious box which he received. So the idea that I had was, you know, it's leading the viewer in to wonder what's inside the box. Then the midway point, or the reveal, where Glenn talks about what's in it, and then there's the sort of nostalgic elements where he connects that back to his childhood, and we're hoping to talk about some more emotional things, but also just to get to know Glenn better as a person as well. And then eventually there's sort of an end piece. I don't want to say too much there, but it involves to do with some images and things from his childhood which came out, and other aspects of his childhood which came out from when he went through this box, and some of his sort of reminiscing thoughts on it now that he's an older gentleman looking back on his childhood. So after having the kind of basic plot that I knew I needed and the themes I wanted that I outlined in my project, I wanted to plan out some of the questions I might ask during the interview. So we were going to have a sit-down interview section in this documentary. And I made a list of lots of different questions that would help get those points across, or help to guide the story along. My personal opinion is I'd rather leave a lot of that to come out organically. So if you do the interview and a lot of that stuff comes out anyway, that's perfect. But having some questions that you've memorised or know to fall back onto, I think is a really good idea, just to make sure you're getting some of the key points. And sometimes you get surprise answers as well, which I think is brilliant. And that's part of the fun of a documentary too. So I had lots of questions I planned out. Also, I don't personally like the idea of just sitting with a list of questions and reading those like a really static interview. I'm just having them more if we get a little bit stuck or I need to come back to them, or to memorise them before to, like I said, you know, guide the interview. But I like to leave a lot of it to be more organic. So I'd say maybe a sort of 70 to 30 split. So 70% trying to just let the person speak, and then 30% if you need to, falling back more on practice questions. But the rest just trying to make it more like an organic conversation. So one other thing that was really good in the pre-production was going to do a bit of scouting. Now, you might not always have the luxury of doing this, and documentaries by nature might not even allow you to do this. But this one, for at least a sit-down interview and some of the locations, because it was just a small, I guess, mini documentary project, it was all quite contained. It was all around Glenn's house and the local area. So I didn't have to be worrying about going to lots of different places. But I had the luxury of going over and looking at it at about the time of day I wanted to shoot it, so late afternoon, so getting a feel for how it might look. And while we were there, one of my original ideas I'd had was just Glenn sitting in his garden room with a cup of coffee, and that would be him doing the interview to make it feel quite relaxed. But Glenn pointed out that actually in his garden room, it's not the nicest looking thing for an interview. And one of his neighbours, literally the next door neighbour, has an in-house studio in their garden, and it had the exact look and feel. So this was just one of these lucky things. And I remember me and Glenn just both looking over the fence, and he pointed to me and he said my neighbour would be absolutely fine with us using it as well. Even though I wanted it to be quite true to life for Glenn, I felt it was close enough, and it was literally his neighbour's house, and it looked that much better that I thought, let's go check it out. So we both went round, we had a little look around, and I captured some of these practice shots. Now, this was really crucial. I'll talk about in the production how crucial this was in the next episode. But I was able to move around with my camera. These weren't perfect shots, I wasn't lighting them or anything, but it allowed me to get a feel for the lighting, the angles I'd use. I was going to use a 2-camera setup for this one. So I moved around and thought about where I'd place the 2 cameras, one for the wider shot and then one for the more close in to capture more of those sort of intimate moments, if you like, or Glenn's reactions. And I was able to get a feel for how the lighting might look, what the lighting levels might look like. And another really good bonus of being able to do that was I went back afterwards and I put them on the computer, and I had a little play around with the 2 shots, and also just a really quick grade to see if I could get the kind of feel I wanted out of it. And it also allowed me to start thinking about how I might light it and how I might plan and position things like the microphones and the lights in this space. Now, I knew it was quite a compact space, so there's a bit limited to what gear I could take in as well. And I had to think about what were the best angles. So this was perfect, just being able to scout the location where we were doing the interview, and that was really, really helpful. If you have that option during pre-production, definitely do that, but I know it's not always possible with a documentary. But I found that really, really useful, and I think it helped make the overall final scenes from that interview look way better. So that was a brilliant part, and it was really enjoyable as well, just to run through things with Glenn too. Now, another really good thing that came out of the scouting trip over to Glenn's was chatting through it with him, and we were deciding what outfit he might wear. Now, with a documentary, there's always a balance between it being too contrived and being real, but for the interview and just for the feel of the film and for this one, I wanted to have a think about what he might wear, and he was also quite interested in that as well. So we had a look through his different outfits, and we picked something that looked quite visually interesting, but also had a little bit of a tie into the film as well, which I'll explain a bit more later on in the next episode. But also, I quite like the idea that it was just one of his outfits and it was something that he would wear, but it was just something a bit more formal and a bit more interesting, because I was also thinking from a sort of cinematography point of view and art direction point of view, just to make it look a little bit more visually interesting and fun. So we also got to pick out his outfit, and I thought that was really nice. But again, I know during a documentary that might not always be something you do, but at least for an interview section, it might be a good thing to think about, and also thinking about how the colours and things might look on the camera. Once I got back from the scouting thing and I reviewed the images and things, I also had to think about if we might need any props or anything like that. Now, props, again, isn't something you'd always need for interviews. And again, I can't give away too much, but there were certain aspects about some of the stories he had, and I realised there were some little props we could use, firstly, to decorate the set as a bit of art direction, as a bit of, production design, to make it look a bit more fun and interesting for the viewer, and to add little bits when you view it for a second or third time. You might notice how they link into some of the stories that Glenn's telling. And also, because we were originally going to use Glenn's space and we were moving over to this space, which, although it was next door, wasn't really Glenn's, we took lots of little elements that were from Glenn's studio. So Glenn himself's a photographer, so we thought about some of the props we could use to bring into the studio to make it feel more like Glenn, more like the character's environment, and make it more true to him. I really like that stuff, planning that out. And again, there's always a balance between it being contrived and also just feeling all coherent as a piece. But I did try to just add a little bit of production design into it, just to make it feel a bit more lived in and a bit more authentic to Glenn. Now, another really great thing about getting those reference images, firstly the ones I collected for the mood board, but also capturing some reference images during the scouting, was I was able to just piece together a really basic storyboard. Now, I haven't done a big whole full storyboard like I might do for a narrative film here where we've got a script. I just wanted to help kind of take it again from the sort of ethos of my mind into something a bit more tangible, that I could get an idea of how it might be structured or how the shots might look. And I just put those down. It's in just 4 or 5, I think it was maybe 6 shots onto the storyboard. I'll have it up on the screen for you. Now, this wasn't an exhaustive storyboard. It was just to give an idea of how it might all flow together and how we might switch between the interview section and some of the B-roll, if you like, of some of the shots of the elements which related to the story which Glenn was telling. And this was really useful just to help, firstly, give me a bit of peace of mind of how I might structure it, and also just to plot out how it might all tie together. One other thing I did during the pre-production was I created a short version of the project overview, so a brief for Glenn, just to give him the key information that he'd need to know, the timings, these kind of things, and then also just a description of the project and all these kind of things just for him. And I'd also made a much more detailed one for myself, and this included an entire shot list. So I made out a list of all the shots I thought we'd need based on the story I wanted to tell, based on the questions I was going to ask. I had that as a checklist, which I could use on Notion, so I could tick those off on the day to make sure I captured them. Again, this shot list was a little bit uncertain in the sense that there might be shots we come up with in the day, and I'm always open to happy accidents or new things coming out. It's not a rigid thing that I have to only stick to that. It just, again, gives me something to fall back on. And having it in this tick sort of checklist format I found really, really useful. And because we shot it over a day and a half, after the first day, I was able to go back through and review what we'd got and what we'd missed, and then go back and use it again, to figure out what shots I still needed to get or which ones I didn't need at all anymore, because we changed, I changed how I was going to focus the video. So it was really, really useful having the shot list again, just to fall back on and make sure definitely had something that could tell the story and all the shots we really needed. So one other thing I did during the pre-production was to create a list of the timings for when we might film certain things. Now, this was firstly useful because I wanted to capture some during golden hour, so actual golden hour, when we've got the nice sort of late afternoon sunlight. So it's crucial to know what time that was going to be and work out that, and then plan those shots for that time. And then before that, we could be doing things like getting set up with the camera, the lighting, the sound, or capturing shots that aren't sort of time of day dependent that I can capture at any time. Now, Spoilers, I didn't stick exactly strictly to this. I'd love to say that I do stick really strictly to this, but it was just more to act as a guide and to make sure I wasn't going too off the rails. But I'll just talk about more in the production, how things went with the actual timing and how well that went. But it was still really useful just to have a kind of guide to keep referencing on the day to make sure I wasn't going too far, or to work out what could be moved around if we needed to. I could not have done this project without doing the pre-production, and even though some of it kind of unfolded organically and there was bits I couldn't have planned for, having that structure to fall back on and having sort of an idea in my mind of how I wanted it to look, and going to do the scouting and problem solving different things that might happen with the lighting, how to get the equipment in, what equipment to use and stuff beforehand, was so useful. And it all really helped pay back during the production, and it saved a lot of time. This was a really tight filming. It was over a day and a half. So having really well thought out pre-production saved, all that time on the day and allowed it to be filmed in such a short period of time. I can't really stress enough just how important it was. And I actually really enjoyed the pre-production, especially gathering all of the source images. That was really fun, just to dream a bit about how it might look. And then also piecing it all together, taking it out of my head and making it a bit more real. And really that going and scouting, looking at the actual location we're going to be shooting in, getting excited about how some of the shots might actually look, and then thinking how to, troubleshoot some of them and these kind of things. Overall, really can't recommend thorough pre-production enough. But as I said, there's always a balance as well of making sure you leave a little bit for spontaneity on the day, and I'll discuss more of that in the next video. Thank you so much for checking this out. I hope you got something valuable from it, and I'll join you very soon.